Hey there, welcome back, Chris here. In this video, I want to talk about red pills that I've learnt from being in the education industry for the past 14 years, knowing people in the industry, going through the education industry or language teaching education path myself, and what I found when I compare it to how I've discovered languages should really be learned. So I've titled this video in a certain way. These are, I believe, red pills. Some of them are going to be obvious, and some of them maybe you've never considered or heard of. In 2009, or 2008, 2009, I decided I wasn't happy in the career that I studied, and I wanted to go overseas, and the only thing I could think about doing was teaching English, but I wanted to be prepared. So I went to a language school near where I lived, and I studied the CELTA certification, which I believe is the Cambridge English Language Teaching for Adults certification. So it's taught by Cambridge, it's a Cambridge certification, it's intensive, and you're going there for 8 hours a day, and you're teaching from day one, and yeah, they really throw you in the deep end, and they teach you basically what is known as the communicative approach to language learning. The communicative approach to language learning is essentially you're teaching either, you might teach a vocabulary class or a grammar class, a writing class, reading class, listening class, or it might include a couple of those. But what you're doing is you're focusing on probably one grammar point per lesson, and you're drilling that grammar point to your students, and you're getting them to produce the language, and you do that from day one. So a typical lesson, they follow what's called the PPP model, which is presentation, practice, production. So you'll present a grammar point. Let's say past simple tense. What did you do? I ate, I drank, I swam, I jumped, I went to, and so on. So you'll present that in context until they understand what it is and how to use it, and then you'll practice, and you practice through drilling. So the first thing you do is you have group drilling. So you'll say, all right, everybody, I ate pizza. I ate pizza. I drank juice. I drank juice. And you'll probably have vocabulary there as well, like pizza and juice and whatever. Then you narrow down the drilling. So you'll go maybe, if you've got a class of 10 people, you'll go, okay, you five. Then you'll get one group to ask a question, one group to answer. Then you might do individuals. And then the production side, you will create a scenario where they have to use it, and you'll create a fake context, maybe a little acting scene or whatever, and then they leave the class, and that grammar point should be locked in. So after I went there, I taught English for 14 years, and in every school that I went to, every school I worked at, they follow this communicative approach. So Cambridge is sort of at the head of how people should teach, or I'm sure all these higher institutions are. But even when you go to teacher training, because a lot of the schools you work for, they'll have their own teacher training, it's based on the same thing. So every language school is really teaching this communicative approach, which means essentially they're getting you to speak from day one, and there is a heavy emphasis on grammar. So when I was teaching and I started learning Chinese, it got to the point where I started to realize that how you learn languages and how languages are taught are actually completely opposite. So I had to wear two hats. So I had my hat for when I was studying Chinese by myself using the input approach and the AJAT method, and then I was going to work every day and teaching using the communicative approach. And I tried to actually talk to my boss and get us to flip things around. There is a teaching method called TPRS, which is based on input, which I believe is a better approach, but obviously it's not widely adopted. But I did start incorporating a bit of that into my lessons, and I did notice improvement in my students. But the point is, during that time, I realized very quickly that both methodologies are literally opposite to each other. So let's go into this into a bit more detail. I've got 5 or 6 language industry red pills that you might find interesting. Alright, so the first one, this is going to be obvious to anyone who's taught English out there, is that language schools are businesses first, sometimes entertainment second, and education distant third. So during my time teaching, or any teacher can probably testify to this, especially if they've taught primary level or even kindergarten, is that you'll catch a lot of slack from your manager if you're not entertaining or interesting. They want you to be entertaining and interesting to students and create a fun environment so the kids go home, tell their parents, you know, that you're so great and that they want to keep going, and then their parents keep paying the fees. So if you are teaching English, or you're thinking of teaching English or teaching a language, do understand that it is a business first. Their number one priority is to make money. It's not to make you a better English speaker. Okay? And when we get to the next couple of points, you'll see why, and you'll see why the communicative approach that they teach caters to this. It caters and helps them to make more money. The next red pill is that the language learning industry is quite literally backward in the way they teach. Now, anyone who's following my channel because they're following the AJAP method or learning Japanese or learning another language, you've probably realized that the input approach is probably the best way, and it's probably best to understand first and speak second. You know, there's that popular saying, why would you learn how to ask a question if you don't know how to understand the reply? In language schools, you will be told to ask questions, and the students won't understand the reply, but they want to get you to speak. So essentially what it does, it creates an environment where you have a bunch of students, often from different countries, if you're in an international school in the West, or just a bunch of people in a room who can't speak English and they don't know what it sounds like. You basically have an environment of them all talking to each other. Another thing that you get taught when you're becoming a teacher is that the students need to speak 80% of the time and you should speak 20% of the time. And the rationale is, you already know how to speak, so why are you talking? When actually, you know, it's probably better if they do listen to you talk and get to grips with how the language should sound. But that's their rationale. But what happens? Well, you have a bunch of people who don't know how English or whatever is supposed to sound talking to each other. And that's why whenever you meet somebody who's speaking English, for example, as a second language, they always, not always, but 99% of the time have an accent. Why do they have an accent? Because they went to language school, they learned through the communicative approach, and they built bad habits, and bad habits are hard to break. That's why basically everyone has this accent problem, and they try to fix it later, and it's very difficult. It's like that saying, teaching an old dog new tricks. It's best to try and get it right the first time. So the third red pill is that the CELTA method actually caters to the language school business rather than the education. So essentially they want a white face that's entertaining, is gonna teach one particular language model, is gonna give them tests that are super easy, and the goal is to get a kid to leave the room knowing how to say something new. Why do they do that? Because if you're drilling students using drilling, it's gonna be fresh in their minds. So when they go home and the parents say, what did you learn today? Which they always do, the kid will be like, oh, I learned this, this, and this. If they learn languages the way you're supposed to learn it, by comprehension first, and the kid goes home and the parents are like, what did you learn? And the kid goes, I don't know, but I think I can understand a bit better. You know, that's not gonna fly. So I think in order to make that business model work, it almost has to be that way, even though it's wrong. Or at least it has to be that way until there's some mass education or mass turnaround on, you know, how people view languages and how languages should actually be learned. Basically, if it looks like you're learning something, parents are happy, they keep paying the school fees, the business is happy, and you know, that's how it all goes down. Red pill number 4, it pays the business. I just touched on this, I guess. It pays the business for students to demonstrate. Like I just said, if a kid goes home and the parents say, what did you learn? They're like, oh, I learned how to say, I ate pizza, I jumped over a fence, you know, I drank juice today. And they're like, oh yeah, that's the right tense, your grammar's good, they feel like they've learned something. Even though they shouldn't really be demonstrating, because they're also gonna just go down that path that everyone else does of, you know, picking up a bad accent because they're creating how they think the accent should be. They never really have a template of how it should sound, because the communicative approach teaches kids or students to speak from day one, and that's what happens. Red pill number 5. Most language teachers, especially freelance language teachers, have no idea what they're doing. The first reason is most of them have never learned a language. So before, when I mentioned I was learning Chinese on my own and I was teaching in a class, you know, I had to wear two hats. I knew how you should learn and I knew what my boss wanted me to do, what I was being paid to do. Most teachers have never learned another language, so they only wear this one hat. And you'll see a lot of them have a huge ego as well. They think they know everything about language learning. I've never met an English teacher that didn't think he was probably the best English teacher alive. And it's pretty funny because most of them are actually terrible. In the 14 years that I taught English, the number of people that I interviewed, observed doing you know, demonstrations, which was part of the interview process. I was always in charge of that. They always thought they were great. Even the ones with experience, they were usually terrible. And when I used to kind of ask them like how they think language is acquired, do they have any knowledge about that? What philosophies do they have? And again, most of them, the vast majority, you know, would sit there and, well, there are 4 parts: writing, reading, speaking, and listening. And I think if they focus on speaking, you know, and they were just bought into that mindset, which is wrong. A lot of the people also on freelance websites, like I know people here who have used it, and often they go on there and it's some guy living in Thailand and they do these conversation classes and you're just paying some guy to talk to you. And they usually don't have any structure. They usually, yeah, as I said, don't know what they're doing and they'll just sit there talking. Someone I know, I met the other week, and they do, I don't know what the app is, Cambly maybe, every week. And they have a new teacher and they talk, and then maybe we'll meet for lunch and I'll be like, what did you learn today? And they're like, oh, he just talked about scuba diving or his life. And I'm like, how many words did you learn? Probably 0. You know, so a lot of the people, they don't plan. It might be someone living in a country trying to be a digital nomad, trying to live on $1,000 a month and doing the teaching gig on the side, which I believe is about $6 or $7 an hour. And a lot of them, they just don't care. So if you are a student who's studying English, do be wary about those platforms and who you're actually getting. The 6th red pill is that the student recruitment side is a billion-dollar industry. So examples are basically probably all universities in the US and probably in the UK. They probably have a recruitment side of the business, a sales side. But you also have, I know, like institutions like British Study Centers, Bell Education, British Council. One in Taiwan is called Intake or UKIAS. And I know people who've worked for these places and they make a ton of money. And their job is to basically go overseas, go to conferences where students go to if they want to study abroad, and they try to sell them. They give them pamphlets, they tell them about their methodologies, they're going to learn English quickly using the communicative approach. And I guess they also try to beat the competition on price. And that's what they do. Why do they make so much money? Well, overseas students usually pay about triple. I don't know what it is now exactly, but I remember when I was younger, we used to have homestay students living in our house. And they would go to university and I'd be like, what are you paying per semester? And it was usually 3 or 4 times the amount that a local would pay. So you're getting commission on that recruitment. However higher up you are in the business, you're getting even more commissions from your sales team, from each region in the world probably. And so, you know, the higher you go, you know, those recruitments, those salespeople who are getting the students, they're making shitloads. Definitely more than the teachers who are teaching the students, at least. Why does all this work? I mean, you can kind of see the connections. Everybody's trying to, you know, they're fishing in a big pond of people who have just bought into the fact that languages are this super hard thing. English is just weird and mysteriously hard, and you just got to keep plugging away at it for 5 to 10 years. And everybody's just bought into this. The students who are going to pay 3 times the school fees have bought into it. The parents of language schools in Asia who want the white face have bought into it. Even the managers of the schools, they probably don't know this, so they've bought into it. Everybody's kind of bought into this thing, and it makes me wonder, like, does anybody know what I've just said? Does anyone really high up know that it is just this big business model, fishing in a pond? The business running on the idea that because most people think English is really hard and because most people think it's going to take 5 to 10 years, that's kind of the foundation that it's all sitting on. And if someone was to pull that down, nobody's making money. But it's interesting because you got the study centers in on it, the universities, prestigious universities. I mean, Cambridge University is teaching the communicative approach. And really, yeah, everybody is just sort of bought into this idea that language is taught this way. So it makes you think, you know, is it a scam? Is it a racket? Do people know? The average person, the average school manager, I would say, doesn't know, or they maybe have an inkling. I think some people have an inkling. Some of the podcasts I'm watching now on Japanese, you hear more and more of them talking about, oh, you should watch anime and this and movies. Those are the students that actually, you know, rise to the top. So I think maybe it's slowly changing, but it's still, you know, a huge billion-dollar industry still. And I think still most people are going to believe that for, you know, years into the future, that, you know, language learning is just difficult and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So anyway, I guess that was a bit of a rant. I tried to section it up on the language learning industry and the different parts of it and how they work and how they all work together into this, you know, system of fishing students out of a pond and, you know, selling them using dated, extremely dated language learning education methods. Tell me what you think though. Do you have experience in teaching? Do you have experience in the education industry? Are you learning a language? Have you been in this situation like me where you were learning a language but also having to teach it using this standardized way and having to consolidate that in your head? Let me know what you think. Drop a like, drop a comment. I want to get to know people in the comments, see what they think, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.